So I just got this really neat little camp axe from Esker. Esker's a Canadian company. They make canvas hot tents and wooden frame bucking saws and things like that. And they've now got a line of axes. So they've got a splitting axe, this camp axe, and they have a hatchet. The camp axe is 3.6 pound head, or about 1,600 grams, and the handle is a packable 24 inches. The sheath is really nice, black leather, double stitching, very nice hardware, and the leather is very thick. So it is full grain and a heavyweight leather. So the sheath is really, really nice. Nice deep stamp. That looks really nice. The kind of design concept is meant to be reminiscent of a Hudson Bay. It's a little different. You know, it's got a curve down here, which is not like a Hudson Bay, but like a Hudson Bay, it's got a very flat top here into the toe. So that's pretty neat. These heads, the axe is assembled in Canada. The heads are made in Austria. And so, like a lot of Austrian and German axes, they have the DI, like you would see in an axe from like Stihl or Ochsenkopf or Mueller or something. I'm not sure what company makes these, but it looks really nice. It's got a fairly wedgy splitting. I think this is going to be a good splitter, and I think a lot of people, this is going to be the exact sort of axe they're looking for camping. A lot of people, you know, it's billed as a general purpose axe, but what a lot of people do when they're camping is they just, you know, have a little bit of firewood that they want to split, small pieces they can cut with a handsaw, and they want those split. And I think that this would be a great axe for that. So that's what I'm going to try it out as first. So I'm going to keep the grind that it has. It's 30-degree convex grind. It has a small edge on it. It's not finger cutting sharp, but it's a nice edge for splitting. So I'm going to try it out for that first.
Just having a look at the factory edge. I've already had this out splitting. The edge it comes with works great for splitting. I've got a bevel gauge here and I've measured it. It's convex, so it's not flat. It's not exactly 30 degrees, but I think overall on average, you could say it's about 30 degrees. This one came with an edge, but not sharp enough to cut me. But it worked. It did work great for splitting, but it is advertised as a more general purpose axe. If you want to do some chopping, so some bucking or felling, limbing, I suggest you put a sharper edge on it and a little bit more general purpose grind, which I think 25 degrees should be good. Kind of a compromise, still good for splitting, but we'll do some chopping when you need it to, and so that's what I'm going to do with the file. All right, so I'm filing in the primary bevel, and as I had mentioned, I'm going for 25 degrees flat. I like it. Flat grind. I'm going to put on a micro bevel too when the time comes. I'm not going to go into how to sharpen basically after this. I'll just skip ahead to when it's done. But I will put a couple links in the video description to videos, not mine, but other people's, that I think are a good introduction to using a file. All right, so I'm working on the other side. I'm doing a mixture of draw filing like this and push filing like that. And I just wanted to mention the kind of feedback I'm getting from the file, which is that this steel is pretty easy to file, and that's good. It might mean that it's not particularly hard, but that's okay for an axe that's going to be used probably mostly for splitting. That's all right, because that means the steel is going to be tougher. But if you take it to a really thin edge, you'll have to maintain it a little bit more. Now the advantage is that maintaining it is easier, but it's not going to, I suspect, I don't know, because I haven't really tried it yet, but I suspect it's not going to hold a crazy edge for a long time. But it's going to be less likely to chip, and it's going to be easier to file. So that's the trade-off. So yeah, I think it's going to be fine. But I just wanted to mention that so you get an idea of what my experience is with that. And along those lines, so I was sent this, I should mention this because I think it's just important to mention for reviews. I was sent this for free by Esker, which I'm very happy to get it. I think, yeah, I'm excited to try it out. But it does mean, that I didn't spend my own money on it. But there was also no conditions, so I'm just going to give my honest opinion, which is all I promised you that I would do, that I would try it and say what I think. All right, so I finished filing. I was targeting 25 degrees. I got a little carried away. It's actually a little bit less than that, but not much. It's certainly not down to 20. So it's in between, maybe 23 degrees. I think that's fine. I've taken off a lot of steel. I don't want to take off anymore, so I'm going to just hone it now, maybe polish the file marks off a little bit, smooth them out, and then I'll give it a shot. See how it does. So I've ground on the micro bevel, the secondary bevel with the axe puck here, and I'm just finishing it up, just trying to deburr it. This is about 35 degrees. I'm not going to measure it, but that's the ballpark. That'll be a nice durable edge, and this is the part that you maintain regularly. I won't go into details about how to use a stone or puck on an axe, but I'll put a link in the description for that, as well as the file stuff. All right, I'd say that's sharp enough to cut wood. When Esker asked me to review this axe, the first thing I thought about was that I had an upcoming trip to the Algonquin Park area for work, and I could bring this up and maybe I'd get a chance to try it. So I did that. I did some splitting, which you saw, and then I thought, I might sharpen it up, and if there's any trees blow down across an access road or something, maybe I'd get a chance to show how it would perform getting me out of a jam or something. But I was working, I was quite busy. I didn't have time to get it sharpened up. And towards the end of my stay, we had a couple storms. The second one was massive storm, and there were trees down. I did have to cut my way through a couple of them with an axe, but I hadn't had this sharpened up yet, so I had a different sharp axe with me. And so I thought, well, I could probably replicate that situation closer to home. So that's what I'm going to do here. I've got a cedar that's down, and I'm going to act as if I've got to clear it on a roadway. And we'll see how, if you were traveling and there was a tree down, and you did have to chop your way through, if what you had was this axe, sharpened up, ready to go, could you do it? Let's find out. So I think I'm going to make 2 cuts. I'll do 1 cut here, and then I'll move you guys and make the other. And that's, you know, if it was across the road and you need to make room for a vehicle, that's what you'd be doing. There. All right, so I'll move you guys for the next one. Move you again. Okay, so that's it. That segment is bucked, and if this is a road, then all we'd have to do is drag this to the side and we'd be through. All right, here's a little bit of a harder test. This is ironwood or hop hornbeam. Locally, we call it ironwood. If you live somewhere else, you might call it something different, but it's Australia virginiana. It's very hard. It's about as hard as hickory. And I'm going to buck this with this axe and then finish my little story. It's a little punky, but still pretty hard. Still good in the middle. Anyway, so after we had a couple nights of storms, we had to evacuate. So the roads started to wash out. We didn't want people stuck, so, and the dam started to overflow, and there was a danger of flash flooding from the beaver lodges, or beaver dams, sorry. And so, too soon to try and separate. So my time to do an Algonquin Park kind of wilderness test of this was cut short, but still lots of chances to show how it works closer to home. So I think that's what I've done. So the handle's a little fat up here, but still decent for choking up on down here, which is good enough. I'm just brushing out around this tree. This is an ash that has basically died, almost dead, from emerald ash borer, and I'm gonna just do a little felling just to show how this axe does felling a small tree. This is bittersweet there. Okay. So, something I wanted to talk about with this axe is the fact that it's got such a short handle. That can be dangerous if you're really not careful. So that's something I wanted to be sure to mention, was to be careful. With a 24-inch handle, you're close to the head of the axe when it's moving, and you want to make sure that you're splitting safely, so keep your hands at or below the level of the head. Don't let the head get down like that. When you're swinging, you want to split like this. However you do that, that's something that's important for safety. So you can split kneeling down. If you're at a campsite splitting small wood, that's a good safe practice. And for felling, you really want to be careful of your foot placement, and not, I really wouldn't chop high up like this, because if you glance, it's going to go, there's a high chance it's going to go in your foot. So something that you often see recommended is to kneel down. The problem with that is if something goes wrong with the tree, it falls when you don't expect it, or a direction you don't expect. It's not as easy to get moving, get out of the way. But chop low. You have to be extra careful whenever you're using a short-handled axe. Adjust the lay a little bit here. All right, after felling a tree and bucking a couple logs, I'm going to do a quick edge check. It still cuts paper, not as well as it did before. This is kind of a stiff Domino's wire. Probably wouldn't do that with newsprint anymore, but it's still got an edge that you can keep working with. So that's pretty good. It's not super hard steel that's going to hold an edge for a really long time, probably because it's hardened to prioritize toughness, and I think that makes sense. So I'm satisfied with that. You can take it down to a general purpose working edge that will allow you to do lots of limbing and bucking, things that require an edge, and it will perform, and it won't be too onerous to maintain. So that's pretty good, and I'm happy with that. Probably most of you have not had a chance to check out the Esker Camp Axe in person, so I thought it might be useful to do a quick compare and contrast with a couple axes that you may or may not be familiar with. The Esker Camp Axe, just to remind you, is 3.6 pounds or 1,600 grams. That's the head weight. And so I've got a couple axes of similar weight to compare it to. I've got Esker Outdoors Montreal pattern, 3.5 pound, and the Council Tool 3.5 pound Dayton pattern. And then I've also got this little Scott Montreal pattern. Scott was a company out of Montreal, long since ceased production, but I think this will be a good stand-in for a typical bushcraft or pack axe that a lot of manufacturers have a version of. If you look superficially in profile, the Scott is somewhat similar, but it is 800 grams compared to the Esker 1600, so it's half the weight. The edge length is the same, but you can see when you look down on it, top-down view, the Esker is just so much chunkier. It's got a much wider pull, much fatter through the eye. Part of that is how thick the DI is, but a lot of it is how thick the eye walls are. And the blade is much thicker, and the bit is thicker, especially right behind the edge bevels. And so this is just a lot wedgier. And despite the fact that the Esker has a fairly short handle, it's still substantially longer than a lot of bushcrafter pack axes, including the little Scott here. So I think that these axes can be nice, especially for summer hiking and things like that. But if you've got a firewood to split, I think you can see why the Esker would be just a lot more efficient for that kind of job. And then moving on to the Esker Montreal, that is an axe I think of as a very specialized chopping pattern. And so it's got super thin cheeks, a very wide edge, a very wide bit, and a long cutting edge. And it chops very well, especially in softwood. But in my experience, it is not a splitter. It can split a little bit, but it's definitely not a strong suit. Whereas the Esker, just a lot wedgier, a little bit heavier, I think it would do a lot better. And in my experience, it has. And then the Dayton is a more general purpose pattern, but even it is not as thick through the eye, and the bit is not as thick right behind the edge bevel. So I hope you can see that. Just how much chunkier the Esker is and how fat it is right behind the edge. So I think that's why I think the Esker's strongest suit is its splitting capability. I have a couple more things to say about this handle. One I already mentioned is that at 24 inches or 61 centimeters, it's relatively short. So in order to split or fell safely, that's something you're definitely going to want to take into account. I already talked about that. If you skip that part of the video, that's fine. I'm going to put some links in the video description to other people who have talked about safety with short-handled axes. Otherwise, the handle feels very comfortable. The ergonomics are good. I don't think it's too thick. It could be thinned down a little bit here, but I didn't notice any issues with handle shock or anything like that, so I'll probably leave it alone. It's nice and slender here. I am considering changing the shape of the palm swell just a little bit to try and make it feel a little longer, move my grip down a bit, but as it is, it's quite comfortable, so I'll probably just leave it alone. There's no significant run out to speak of that I'm able to detect. The growth rings are aligned roughly parallel to the bit. I don't think that's that important, but a lot of people do. And if you're one of those people, at least in this example and some other photos I've seen online, Esker has taken that into account. So you'll like that. This handle came without varnish, just with looked to be a coating of linseed oil, and that's nice. I'm not a fan of varnish. I think it gives you blisters, and I think as it chips and cracks eventually with use, it doesn't age very well, and it's hard to maintain. Linseed oil is easier to maintain, but it is a process. You don't get a good linseed oil finish with just 1 or 2 coats. So I've already put a couple coats in. That's something you're going to want to keep up with to get a good weather-resistant finish. Until that point, if you're taking this axe out in wet conditions, wet snow, rain, even dewy vegetation, it's a good idea to put maybe some camp wax or tool wax or something on it, just to keep the handle from soaking up too much water. A little bit will raise the grain. That's not a big deal. You can take that off with steel wool or sandpaper. But if you get too much water in the handle, it's going to swell inside the eye and then contract as it dries out. And eventually, a few cycles of that will shorten the life of the hang. So I would avoid that. Speaking of linseed oil, that's something, a thin layer of linseed oil can be used to protect the sill of the head. Or other oils are fine too. One thing I do want to point out is that because the mask is leather, I find that leather masks or sheaths, if you store the axe in them for long periods of time, like weeks or months, it can tend to rust even with some oil on the head. And so what I use is a little bit of wax, so just the part that's covered by the leather. My recipe for the wax that I use is on the lid there. I like it because it smells nice, but you can use other waxes. That's fine. I just find that it helps prevent rust. The rest is not a big deal. If you get a little bit of rust on the head, that's normal. You can just clean that off. But I think that if you get a nice axe, and you put it away nice, it's nice to have it nice again when you take it out. And also to that end, I just use a scrub brush and a little bit of Simple Green or Windex to take off some of the gunk that's left over after I use it before I put it away. So overall, I really like this axe. I think that it looks nice. It's made out of high quality materials that are put together well. There's attention to detail. You know, the stamp looking as nice as it does, and the leather sheath, which is really nice. All that stuff is great. I like how Esker is trying to fill a niche with this axe that's not filled by a lot of other axes that are on the market. Not a lot of other manufacturers are doing something quite like this, and I think this is something that would appeal to a lot of people, especially because of how it fits into Esker's other products. So the hot tents, the stove, the kind of winter camping stuff, the wooden fold-up buck saws that look really nice. I do, after looking at their website, I do kind of want one of those. So maybe I'll consider that. But yeah, with that set of gear, this axe fits right into that. You've got, cold nights and the winter camping, and you've got a stove and you've got to feed it with firewood. You can buck up a log with a saw and then split it up with an axe exactly like this. Plus, the axe can chop your face cut and do the limbing, so it can bust up some kindling. Yeah, it fits into that role quite nicely. In that context, the compromises that they've made in terms of like the handle length and stuff make sense. I personally would like a couple extra inches on the handle for me, but I understand why they didn't do that, and that's fine. They definitely didn't pull any punches on the way to the head. This chunky head will make it a better splitter than other camp axes. And the handle is longer than a lot of others, so I'm glad it's at least 24 inches and not, 19 or 22 or something that you see in a lot of bushcrafting pack axe type things. I think that this handle length will, and the head weight will give this the kind of oomph that you want if you're actually, you have some wood to split while you're camping. So that's really nice. Yep, so good concept, good execution, attention to detail. I like it. And thanks, Esker. I'm glad I have this, and good job.